What's up, heathens? How are you guys doing today? I'm doing pretty good. Now, today we have a 5 facts that destroy atheism video. Is going to be broken up into 2 different videos though, so if you want to get the next half of this video, be sure to go down there and hit subscribe right now. Today though, we're going to be covering a few things like how the earth exploded out of the sun, as well as tiny cells having a nucleus with protons and electrons and stuff. So, if you want to learn how these facts destroy atheism, please stay tuned. So this right here is the guy that we're talking to today. Now, this is only half of his video. He's got 5 facts that he's going to be presenting that apparently just dismantle atheism and dismantle evolution. So we're going to give him a fair shot to try to do this, all right? Because we need to listen to everybody, no matter how fucking crazy or Unabomber-y he looks. So let's give this guy a try real quick.
Hi, I'm Dr. Richard Ruling, here to share with you 5 facts that would dispel atheism and evolution.
My body is prepared for these 5 facts.
Time to time in the media, we see articles that say they've disproved God, the universe is too vast, they can't find him anywhere, and that may seem ridiculous to some people, but we're going to look at some facts of science right now.
Let's do it, but I'm going to have to limit you to facts. Each time you state something and say it's a fact, and it's not really a fact, you're going to lose 5 points and you get closer to hell.
First of all, number 1, only about 1% of all knowledge is knowable by any one person.
Okay, that's not a fact. Minus 5 points. I don't think that 1% of all knowledge is the only bit that's knowable to humans. I think that like that would be really hard to gauge. Like, I feel like that's just pulling numbers out of your ass. So this would be a combination of like an equivocation fallacy, because that 1% isn't what one person knows, it's our current knowledge.
What a mathematician, PhD in math from University of Texas said. And if we can only know 1% of all knowledge, any one person, what's the chances that God might exist in the other 99%?
This has been used a lot. There was that one guy from Audacious Church that made a really big stink over it about a year ago or so, because he tried to do this whole thing where it's like, I went and I debated this guy and I was like, here's 99% of all knowable things. Why doesn't God exist in here? This is essentially a God of the gaps argument. You know, that's fine if you want to chalk God up to living in the gaps of our knowledge, but that's just a very unsatisfying answer, and I feel like it only stifles our search for actual truth and actual reality. I also love how he didn't specify which mathematicians and scientists say it so that I could fact check it.
Clearly, there might be some area we're not looking at if we don't see God. And by the way, there are some scientists, we'll mention it later, who do believe in God.
Yes, scientists can indeed believe in God. That's fine. There have been plenty of scientists throughout history that have believed in God and discovered a lot of things that actually go against their preconceived notions of reality. I feel like pointing out this is just sort of like a pedantic kind of argument from creationists. Yes, there are creationist scientists out there. Not that the scientists are studying creation or whatnot, but that they are scientists and that at the same time they are creationists. Which, I mean, that's a compartmentalization on a whole different fucking level for me.
And in fact, I happen to have 3 degrees in science myself.
Oh, big fucking whoop-de-doo. I've got a doctorate in theology over there and scientism. Boo, bitch. I also have 2 very real degrees. But again, none of that means a thing. Like, that doesn't, that's just an appeal to authority. I've got 3 degrees. Oh, okay there, Mr. Geriatric. I don't give a fuck how many degrees you have. You think God exists in the 99% of knowledge that we don't have, thereby espousing the God of the gaps argument, which is a bullshit argument that only stifles our search for actual answers.
A degree in chemistry. And that brings us to law number 2, the second law of thermodynamics. Second point is that the energy systems of the body run downhill. unless acted upon by some outside force. And, this Earth would freeze if we didn't have the sun giving us light and heat, basically. The big theory, Big Bang, is that we exploded off the sun and somehow cooled down and things got just right for life. Well,
what the fuck are you even talking about?
Big theory, Big Bang, is that we exploded off the sun.
So let me get this straight here. He thinks the Big Bang is when the sun, apparently, part of it exploded, and out of its sunny vagina came the Earth and Mars and all of this shit in reality. Like, it was birthed out of the sunny vagina. Big orgasm from the sun, just... There's the Earth, and it's just perfectly in alignment right there. To say that we need the sun in order for our planet to not be too cold or to support life, I mean, that's kind of a post hoc assertion, because we needed the sun in order for our planet to even exist, regardless of whether or not it has atmosphere. Like, the reason why our solar system is the way that it is today is because of the sun, of its mass, and of the different particles and everything that were surrounding the sun in different orbits. We just so happen to be in this orbit, and yeah, we are in a Goldilocks zone. But that doesn't mean that a creator plucked us out of whatever the fuck collection he has on his wall and put us directly in a spot that was, quote-unquote, perfect for us.
Look at that a little closer, okay? If there was an explosion on the sun, how did all the objects, the planets, become so nicely rounded?
Gravity, motherfucker. Like, in the early universe, static forces were the things that bound dust particles together. And as soon as those dust particles collected enough, gravity took over. Then all of these different meteorites and everything that had been collecting and building up eventually formed into all of our planets that we have today. The reason why they are around is because the planets, they would get so big and then gravity would take over and basically crush it down into an oblate spheroid. And that's how gravity works.
Perfect spheres, not jagged rocks from an explosion. And how did those planets all come into orbit? Instead of a projectile just shooting off into space, they came and are orbiting the sun in a regular pattern. And for Earth, it's just the right distance. I mean, if we were 1% closer to the sun, we would roast and toast.
No. So, how did the planets get into their specific orbits? Well, that goes back to the whole thing of when our sun was very, very young, and, there was all of these particles already orbiting the sun. They collected in these specific orbits, specific paths. So, I mean, they collected in these paths, and yeah, we just so happened to be in the right zone. If it didn't happen here on this Earth, it could have happened elsewhere in the universe, right? I mean, there's a pretty good probability of it happening, not just here, but also in other places. That's why we found exoplanets out there that can, or that we suppose, all of our readings seem to indicate that it could support life. Now, if we got closer to the sun, I think that we would have to be significantly closer to the sun before we'd actually start feeling like a lot of effects of it. I think we calculated it one day for this Islamic video that was saying the exact same shit, and we would have to basically fall into the sun for a good month before we would really feel anything. The sun would get bigger in the sky, of course, but before we actually started to burn up or roast and toast, as Dr. Geriatric here wants to put it, it would take a full month for that to happen, and then it would exponentially degrade into the sun because of how massive the sun is. It's not that, we get a little bit closer and we're going to toast. No, that's not it. Mars is actually farther away from the sun, but even there is indication that it could have possibly hosted life at some point. They have found, different things that suggest that, like, there could have been liquid water there at one point in time. So, he also asked about why we don't just fly off into space. Why do we circle around the sun? Again, because of gravity. That's how gravity works. I mean, we're constantly in like a free fall, like not a free fall, but we're constantly falling kind of towards the sun. But you see, we're in a path where we miss it, and then we just continuously kind of fall, but we're not actually like falling. Like we fall a little bit and then we get flung out, and so that's why it's not an exact circle.
And if we were 1% farther away, we might freeze. And by the way, on that topic, how did Earth get its spin?
While we're on this topic of total bullshit stuff that's easily answered through Google searches, how about we also bring up the spin of the Earth? Because fuck the reason for the season. That's actually the axis, that's not the spin. But I mean, the spin does help along with the axis. So how do we begin spinning? That's part of like the Genesis story for the Earth. I mean, you know, back in the early solar system, I mean, there were a lot of things going on. A lot of things were hitting what would become the Earth. I believe the current running theory is that a smaller planet in the same orbit smashed into the Earth and got it kind of spinning, and then that also formed the moon. I know that knocking it actually knocked it off its axis, and that's why we have like seasons and shit.
So that we have days and nights. If the Earth wasn't spinning, one side would roast from the sun and the other side would freeze.
Well, no, I don't think that if the Earth just stopped spinning, that would be the thing to fucking worry about. I think if the Earth stopped spinning, we would all fucking die from the Earth stopping spinning. I mean, we'd be thrown about and shit.
But that spin is just the right amount for our 24-hour days for us to get some rest at night.
For one thing, he says that the Earth spins in a perfect 24-hour cycle, and that's not true. You know, obviously we have the leap year, so it's not a perfect 24 hours or whatnot. But also before it settled into the near 24-hour cycle, we were actually spinning a lot faster. And like the moon at one point was a lot closer and all this other shit. So, I mean, it hasn't always like spun as fast as it's spinning now. And the days haven't always been as long as they are now.
It all has a great, it's the reflection of a loving creator who provided for us, you know.
Okay, if you want to come to that conclusion, fine. That there's no real indication that, you know, it's God's love. I mean, if you really think about it, there are so many kids out there that die of heat stroke, and so many people in general that die of heat stroke and all this other shit. How is that really God's love? There are a lot of kids that die in their sleep, or that die at night for whatever the fuck reason. Why would that be a sign of God's love? It just seems like he's just saying that, oh, it's God's love because it is how it is, and that doesn't get us anywhere.
Things are just right, and if this Earth exploded off the sun, how did we get atmosphere? You know, the other planets don't have atmosphere, to our knowledge. Our moon doesn't. You know, and by the way, how did we get a moon? You know,
why do we have atmosphere? We have atmosphere because of gravity. You know, other planets do indeed have atmosphere. If you want to think about Jupiter, Jupiter's a gas giant. All it has is pretty much atmosphere, if you want to call it that. There are other gas giants in our solar system. It's very incorrect to say that none of the other planets have atmosphere. Okay, the moon doesn't have atmosphere because it doesn't have a sufficient amount of mass to hold an atmosphere.
You know, there's no deep crater in the Pacific Ocean somewhere where the moon exploded off and came to orbit around the Earth. And by the way, Saturn has 53 moons. How did it get them? And Jupiter has 67. You know, did they all explode at once?
Did they all explode at once? Why the fuck are you asking if they exploded at all? Like, I don't know. I don't understand what an explosion has to do with producing moons around Jupiter and fucking Saturn. You know, how any satellites, natural satellites surrounding a planet are formed is by debris and stuff, you know, minerals and whatnot collecting into, you know, into these spheres. And that's how you get the moons. That's why there are a bunch of moons around Saturn and Jupiter and all that other kind of shit.
How did they come to orbit in that, you know, this unbelief in God and in Genesis begs a thousand questions, or at least 100 that are unanswerable. And we just looked at a few right now.
And we have science to explain how everything came to be. Okay.
But basically, when God asked Job, where were you when I formed the stars and so on? Can you guide Arcturus? What about Orion and the Pleiades? God understands. He's the one that guides them.
Oh, okay. So because a book in the Bible tells us that God is like, oh, do you control Orion? Do you know where Orion's at? Tell me, where the fuck's Orion, motherfucker? Like, just because God in there says, oh, I control Orion, doesn't mean that a deity out there is actually controlling shit. Just because a book says it doesn't make it actually true. You have to actually prove it.
Can't we accept something bigger than we are that might be in charge? Intelligent design is too strong an argument. I've seen an ad with intelligent design for some car, intelligent design. Well, we are far more marvelous than a car in the inner mechanism if you understand the human body. And I'm speaking as a physician who does understand some things. We'll get to it. In fact, that brings us to number 3 on DNA. The 3 letters, DNA, is point number 3 I want to make, is that Anthony Flew, famed atheist and outspoken against God, when he understood the complexity of the DNA molecule, came to believe in God.
Okay, yes, DNA is a molecule. DNA, reacts differently when you put the different pieces together in different ways. Like, just because there's complexity in the DNA molecule doesn't mean that a god had to do it. We have natural explanations for how DNA could have formed on its own. We have been able to prove self-replicating RNA structures. We've been able to prove that amino acids are able to arrange themselves in ordered sort of structures. We haven't been able to put together, this information with the creation of DNA or the creation of life or whatnot, but there's just a very tiny bit that is unknown right now. And just because we don't know it doesn't mean that God had to have done it.
Bless his heart, and may God bless him too. But the point is that it's far too complex for it to just happen by random chance of some molecules. And by the way, I have a chemistry major in college, so that molecules just don't happen to bump into each other and form amino acids, and the amino acids bump into each other to form proteins, and the proteins bump into each other to form organs, and the organs have a different function. Think of your kidney. Some is collecting tubules, some of it is the excretion of, etc., separating impurities from the blood.
First of all, you whittling down like the whole molecular fusion and all this other shit, how molecules combine and stuff to just molecules bumping into each other. I mean, it makes me question how well you actually did in chemistry class, because, I mean, it's not just like, oh, here's a water molecule bumping into like a carbon or something like that, and you got Diet Coke. Like that's that's not how shit works. But also, like, different chemicals mixing with each other cause different chemical reactions.
Very complex, and liver, very complex, getting rid of toxins and poisons to the body. And if we were evolving, why can't we handle cholesterol,
It's really funny how you tell us that we can't handle cholesterol, because there are actually 2 different types of cholesterols. There's LDL cholesterol and HDL cholesterol. LDL cholesterol is the bad cholesterol. HDL cholesterol is the good cholesterol. And then there's triglycerides, which will also fuck you up. So if you have high triglycerides, but like a low HDL or a high LDL cholesterol, you're more prone to have like strokes and heart attacks and shit. But high HDL is actually really good for your body. Basically, what HDL cholesterol does is it kind of collects the bad cholesterol and, handles it so that it doesn't clog your arteries. Because that's what LDL cholesterol does, is it causes buildup and everything in your arteries, causing them to narrow and eventually could cause a stroke or heart attack or something. So our bodies have actually evolved to appropriately use cholesterol.
It's just that it's in the Bible that we're not to eat the blood or the fat of meat, and were they going to kill their only cow often, or the sheep? It was a sacrifice type of thing once a year on Passover. I'll just say, hey, not good for us to speculate, but at the loss and the shedding of blood, it says the life is required.
Just to preface here, guys, this guy is like a heart doctor. I looked him up on the internet, and he pushes the kind of the woo-woo medicine for, heart patients and whatnot. On his site, he talks about how he's got a magical diet that'll take you off all of your heart medications, stuff like that. So he's already peddling woo in his actual profession, and now he's peddling woo in other areas.
Since man began eating meat or flesh after they got out of the ark, the man's life shortened dramatically. Well, anyway, that is enough to say maybe about the DNA and the molecules, but molecules are on a small pattern what the universe is on big. It has
no, cells and shit are like totally different than like the universe. Okay, they're completely different. They have different mechanisms and everything like that. That's an equivalence fallacy that he's trying to use right here. So you can't compare the two.
Central nucleus, just like we think of the sun, and electrons revolving around the nucleus, just like planets revolve around the sun. But the interesting thing.
No, that's not just like planets revolving or orbiting a sun or anything like that. Like they're not comparable.
About the nucleus is that it's made out of protons. They're all positively charged.
Well, this is also an equivocation fallacy, because he's talking about cells inside the nucleus of a cell. At least in, I believe it's eukaryotic cells. I mean, that you have like DNA that's inside the nucleus. What he's talking about are nuclei of atoms, being that protons are in there. I mean, this is obvious. He's obviously double speaking here and talking about two entirely different situations.
They would repel each other, but the Bible says that in Christ all things consist or hold together, and that's what really holds things together in this universe, if we would understand it.
So now Jesus is responsible for holding protons and neutrons and electrons together so that we have this universe? Is that what he's saying? Is he saying that Jesus holds together protons and neutrons? Like, I don't know. That seems like a lot of work for a dead Jew on a stick. Thank you, heathens, for making it to the end. I did not expect this guy to get all the way up to 100 points being taken off. Let me know in the comments below which alternative fact was the worst. While you're down there, make sure that you subscribe and smash that like button. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.